There is a place in Florida that is not supposed to exist. It sits on the edge of the Everglades, near Blackwater and Alligator trails, surrounded by fencing and bright lights that never turn off. It does not appear in federal detention records. It does not show up on ICE custody logs. Families say their relatives were taken there and then vanish from every system, every phone list, every database. The locals call it Alligator Alcatraz. The name is a joke, intended by supporters of the facility to make cruelty entertaining. They have branded it as a theme park of punishment, a place where suffering becomes spectacle. But for the men detained inside, there is nothing comedic about it. One survivor put it simply, "We are locked up in 1,000 square foot cages, 32 people in each cage. The lights are always on. It's like a stadium. You never sleep." This episode is about that place, and about another detention center, older, more familiar, a facility on the outskirts of Miami, known as Krome. Together, these two institutions form a hidden architecture of fear and disappearance. Built during the first year of the Trump regime's return to power, they are more than detention centers. They are tools, engineered for dehumanization, punishment, and removal. And for many, they become a place of torture. When Donald Trump returned to office on January 20th, 2025, his regime began to build what is publicly called a mass detention and deportation machine. The language was blunt. In speeches, rallies, and debates, officials described migrants as criminals, invaders, subhumans. The administration began using words aliens and illegal aliens, again in all official documents. One executive order stated, "This country is under attack, overrun by cartels, criminals, and unvetted military-age males." Another justified detention by claiming many of these aliens present significant threats to national security, public safety, commit vile and heinous acts. Amnesty International writes, "These harmful and false narratives have gone on to justify and shape a largely racist mass immigration detention and deportation machine." This rhetoric was not accidental. It had a purpose. Fear creates power. Fear enables control. And fear justifies the construction of a detention facility unlike any the United States had ever seen. A facility with no federal oversight, no integration into federal databases, no consistent records of who was being held. A facility that allowed people to disappear. In July 2025, the Everglades detention facility opened. From above, it looked like a military encampment. Rows of massive white tents on swampy land, surrounded by razor wire and floodlights. The state of Florida gave it a nickname, a piece of branding meant to be memorable, even fun: Alligator Alcatraz. It had a capacity to detain 3,000 people. But capacity was not the real story. The real story was secrecy. Amnesty reports it is the first state-owned and operated immigration detention facility in the United States. Consequently, not only is there no federal oversight, it is also not integrated into ICE systems and databases. That means no trafficking of detainees, no information for families, no automatic access to lawyers, no records if someone dies. The research found the absence of registration or tracking facilities incommunicado detention and constitutes enforced disappearances. And people were taken there, and then they were gone. One attorney told Amnesty, Families have no idea where their relatives are. The government simply denied the person existed. The conditions inside were described as inhumane and unsanitary. Survivors described 1,000-square-foot cages packed with more than 30 men each, inside giant tents. Metal cots, little airflow, bright lights, always on. The lights are like stadium lights. They never turn off, or even dim. It's very cold. The air conditioning is very strong. There are a lot of mosquitoes. There were toilets overflowing with feces, leaking into sleeping areas. There was little access to showers, little access to medical care, little access to rest. Food was described as poor quality. Water smelled of chemicals. One survivor said, "You live with the insects. You sleep with them. They don't care. You are nothing." Many described being shackled. People reported being always shackled when they were outside their cage. They were not shackled to prevent escape. They were shackled to demonstrate control. Amnesty concluded detention conditions at both facilities amount to cruel, inhumane, and degrading treatment. But inside Alligator Alcatraz, there was something else. Something worse. Something the survivors simply call the box. This is one of the most disturbing elements of the facility. A punishment device. A place of isolation. A cage inside a cage. Witnesses describe it as a 2x2 foot metal structure, like an upright kennel bolted to the ground, open to the weather. There is no shade, no seating, no dignity. Inside it, a person could not stand upright comfortably. They could not sit. They could not stretch their legs. One detainee told Amnesty, "They put you in the box with your feet attached to restraints on the ground. You are left there for hours. No water. The sun burns you. You feel like you are going to die." Another said, "The box is the worst. You lose your mind. You scream, but no one hears you." The facility claimed it was disciplinary. In reality, it was torture. Amnesty noted the use of the box at Alligator Alcatraz amounts to torture or other ill treatment. There was no judicial review, no medical oversight, no record keeping. The abuse was invisible, and that was the point. Alligator Alcatraz is unique in one way that makes it especially dangerous. It is state-run, not federal. There is no ICE oversight, no DHS accountability, no federal standards. It does not appear in the same tracking system as every other immigration detention center in the country. Amnesty writes, it is not integrated into ICE systems or databases. That makes people inside unrecordable, which means abuses are unrecorded, which means deaths are unrecorded, and families are left to wonder where their sons, fathers, husbands, brothers have gone. One attorney said, "People disappear? That's the only word for it. They disappear into the swamp." Behind the swamp, the fences, the cages is a different story, a financial one. The facility has already absorbed more than $360 million in state-issued contracts, with a projected $450 million annually to operate. All of this funding was taken from the Florida Division of Emergency Management, the budget normally set aside for hurricanes, floods, and disaster relief. Amnesty writes, funds for this construction and operation have been taken from emergency management programs. In other words, the money that should have been used to protect Florida residents from hurricanes was used to build cages in the Everglades. The report notes, the government of Florida cut resources from essential social and emergency management programs by allocating discretionary funds to finance Alligator Alcatraz. This is not a humanitarian program, it is a business. "25 miles away, on the edge of Miami-Dade County, sits another facility, Krome North Service Processing Center. It has existed for decades. For years, advocates have reported abuse, death, and neglect. In 2025, those reports intensified. Amnesty visited Krome, interviewed detainees, and observed the conditions. They found overcrowding, delays in intake, inadequate medical care, prolonged solitary confinement, serious obstacles to legal representation. The facility is run by a private contractor, Akim Global Services, under contract with the Department of Homeland Security. For decades, Krome has been a place where people wait for hearings, for lawyers, for transfer, for deportation. Sometimes, they wait until they die. In 2025, the facility faced what reports call heightened scrutiny after reports of several overcrowding and several deaths. One man told Amnesty, "People get sick. They don't give medical care. Sometimes, people die. And then they just take the body away. You never hear about it again." At both facilities, there is one detail that appears again and again in testimony: the lights. Bright, harsh, never turned off. A man held at Alligator Alcatraz described, "The lights are like stadium lights. They're always on. They never turn off or even dimmed. Sleep becomes impossible. Time dissolves. Days blur into nights, and nights into days." Psychologists call it sensory torture. It breaks the mind. Amnesty concluded, detention conditions amount to cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment. When a person cannot sleep, cannot be alone, cannot escape the heat or the cold, or the noise, they begin to break down. This is not an accident. It is a system, engineered. Every Thursday night, outside the fences of Alligator Alcatraz, people gather. They hold a visual. They call it the Circle of Protection. They light candles. They stand in silence. They read names. Some names belong to men who have been released. Some belong to men who are still inside. Some belong to men who have disappeared. And some belong to men who died. No one knows how many. There are no public records, no oversight, no transparency. Amnesty writes, detention conditions at Alligator Alcatraz violate human rights and in some instances amount to torture or other ill treatment. While Alligator Alcatraz shocked the world with its makeshift box punishment, Krome North Service Process Center has its own method of breaking the human spirit: prolonged solitary confinement. Amnesty reports, prolonged solitary confinement, defined as lasting longer than 15 days, is never permitted under international standards, yet detainees at Krome are regularly subjected to this treatment. One man detained at Krome described the experience. They put you alone in a small cell. No light, no contact. You hear nothing, smell nothing. You start to talk to yourself, even though you hate the sound of your own voice. Days feel like months. You lose your mind. Another recalled, "I asked why I was here alone. They said I was being disciplined, but I didn't know what I did. No one tells you anything. You just sit and think and suffer." Solitary confinement was not only psychological torment, it was also physical torture. Being isolated for weeks or months prevents people from exercising, seeing sunlight, and receiving regular meals and medical care. The combination of sensory deprivation, inactivity, and social isolation can cause permanent mental health damage. Amnesty concluded the use of prolonged solitary confinement at Krome constitutes cruel, inhumane, and degrading treatment and may amount to torture. Detainees in Florida do not remain in one location. They are transferred between facilities, often for minor procedural reason. Each transfer can be brutal. Survivors describe being shackled for hours, sometimes in extreme temperatures. They put handcuffs, leg cuffs, waist chains. You are in that position for hours while they drive us in vans. Sometimes the vans are broke down. Sometimes the vans break down. No one cares. These transfers are not just logistical, they are punitive, a way to enforce control and install fear. Amnesty International considers this practice cruel, inhumane, and degrading treatment, which may amount to torture or other ill treatment. It is part of a pattern of systematic abuse, where every step of detention, intake, daily life, transfers, and punishment reinforce vulnerability, helplessness, and fear. One of the darkest aspects of Alligator Alcatraz and Krome is that people vanish from public records. Unlike traditional prisons, detainees at Alligator Alcatraz are not logged in federal systems. Families are often denied information. Lawyers struggle to track their clients. For all practical purposes, some detainees cease to exist. Amnesty writes, the absence of registration and tracking mechanisms for those detained facilities incognito detention and constitutes enforced disappearance. A survivor said, "My brother was taken. I asked where he was. No one would tell me. I called ICE. They said they don't know. For weeks, months, I did not know if he was alive." Enforced disappearances create a unique kind of trauma. Families are left in perpetual fear. Legal rights are impossible to exercise. Psychological damage multiplies for detainees who know they have no witnesses or protections. The existence of these facilities cannot be separated from politics. In 2025, the Trump regime expanded civil immigration enforcement. They deputized states and local law enforcement under 287G agreements, allowing police officers to act as ICE agents and bounty hunters. In Florida, masked officers in unmarked vehicles enter neighborhoods and homes and workplaces to arrest immigrants. Amnesty notes, communities across the country have seen masked agents in unmarked clothing remove migrants and people seeking asylum from their communities. Armored vehicles and military-grade weapons roving the streets. And armed agents break down doors of homes and vehicles to arrest people. These actions create a climate of fear. Families avoid school, hospital, workspaces, and places of worship. They hide. Children stop attending school. Workers stop showing up to fields. Entire communities are paralyzed by fear. This is not incidental. It is deliberate strategy of intimidation. Both Alligator Alcatraz and Krome have documented medical neglect. Detainees suffer from untreated chronic illnesses, infectious diseases, and medical health crisis. Amnesty reports access to medical care is inconsistent, inadequate, or denied altogether, placing individuals at serious risk of both physical and mental harm. In 2025, several deaths occurred inside these facilities. The circumstances were often unclear, as there is little accountability, poor record keeping, and limited external oversight. One former detainee recounted, "People were sick, they died. They took the bodies, nothing else, no explanation, no family told, no one knows." The combination of abuse, neglect, and arbitrary detention creates conditions in which death becomes a likely outcome. The human cost of these facilities is clear, but the financial cost is equally staggering. Alligator Alcatraz has already absorbed $360 million in state contracts and is projected to cost $450 million annually once fully operational. These funds were diverted from the Florida Division of Emergency Management, the agency normally responsible for hurricanes, floods, and disaster relief. Amnesty notes, funds for its construction and operation have been taken from social and emergency management programs. In other words, emergency response programs suffered budget cuts so that the state could detain migrants. Experts call this the opportunity cost, the value of the next best alternative that is foregone. Every dollar spent on cages and surveillance is a dollar not spent on hospitals, schools, housing for vulnerable communities, hurricane preparation, and relief. The Florida state government justified these expenditures as urgent emergency procurement, using power normally reserved for natural disasters. Amnesty writes, the government of Florida cut resources from essential social and emergency management programs while allocating discretionary funds to finance Alligator Alcatraz. One critic explained, they treat immigration detention as an emergency. Meanwhile, real emergencies go unfunded. People die in storms while money flows into cages. The message is clear. Human and financial priorities are being inverted. For the people inside, the numbers, the contacts, the policies are abstract. The daily reality is physical, brutal, and constant. Wake up under stadium bright lights. Your surroundings, dozens of other men crammed to a 1,000 square foot cage. The air, cold from strong air conditioning, carrying the smell of insects, feces, and unclean water. You live with the insects, you sleep with them. They don't care, you're nothing. Meals, poor quality, often insufficient, and the water smells of chemicals. Hygiene, minimal showers, overflowing toilets, zero privacy. Discipline, arbitrary, cruel, and humiliating. If someone steps out of line, they put you in the box, shackled, or confined to prolonged solitary at Krome. Medical care, inconsistent, delayed, often denied. Chronic illnesses worsen. Acute injuries can be fatal. People get sick. They don't give medical care. Sometimes people die. And then they just take the bodies away. You never hear about it again. Communication, denied access to lawyers or family. No transparency. The outside world becomes a distant, unreachable place. I did not know if my brother was alive. Weeks, months, I kept calling. No one would answer. No one knew. The psychological toll is immense. Constant fear, sensory deprivation, and uncertainty combine to create trauma that lasts long after release. Both facilities violate multiple international human rights standards. Arbitrary detention. Detainees are held without clear legal basis, sometimes for months. Torture and ill treatment. The box, prolonged solitary, shackling, and abusive transfers all meet the definition of cruel, inhumane, and degrading treatment. Right to asylum. Many held have pending asylum claims. Detention obstructs access to fair adjudication. Non-reformal principle. Returning people to countries where they face persecution is prohibited under international law. Arbitrary detention increases the risk of constructive refoulement. Amnesty notes, detention conditions at both facilities violate human rights and, in some instances, amount to torture or ill treatment. Corporate operations like Amnica Global Services at Krome also have responsibility under the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. Companies operating detention facilities have a responsibility to do no harm and respect all human rights whenever they operate. Yet, For decades, abuse persists, deaths continue, and accountability is almost non existent. Amnesty International provides clear recommendations for government action: close Alligator Alcatraz, end state-run immigration detention in Florida, prohibit prolonged solitary and punitive confinement, ensuring humane treatment for all detained persons, restore funding to essential services, redirect funds from detention to healthcare, housing, or disaster relief, ensure access to legal representation, guarantee detainees can contact lawyers and consultants, investigate deaths and abuse, conduct independent, impartial investigations, comply with international human rights laws, uphold the principles of non-reinfoulement and protection against torture. For the survivors and families, these are not abstract recommendations. They are matters of life and death. In the swamps of Florida, surrounded by the Everglades, human beings disappear into state-run cages. Bright lights, endless insects, overflowing toilets, and small cells. These are not isolated abuses. They are part of a systematic, state-sanctioned apparatus designed to install fear, punish, and remove. The world may never see the walls of Alligator Alcatraz, but the survivors' voices carry the truth. If you feel like you are nothing, they want to break you, and they succeed if you let them. I survived, but I carry it with me every day. I don't think I will ever be free. This is more than a detention facility. It is a human rights crisis in plain sight, and it is our responsibility to bear witness, document, and demand change.